In the heart of a wealthy suburban neighborhood, the sun bathed the manicured lawns in golden light, reflecting the affluence that defined the lives of its residents. Inside the elegant home of the Everetts, Emma darted from one room to another, a whirlwind of excitement and anxiety. The air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers, and the sound of her mother's laughter echoed through the corridors as she fussed over the details of the upcoming wedding. But amidst the cheerful chaos, Emma felt a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. "Dad!" she called out, her voice a mix of eagerness and distress. Jack, her father, emerged from the garage, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. He had been tinkering with an old engine, a passion that reminded him of his youth. His face broke into a warm smile upon seeing Emma, but he couldn't shake the worry that lingered in his heart. "Hey, sweetheart, what's up?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. His posture relaxed, but his eyes betraying the concern he felt. Emma approached him, her hands nervously twisting the delicate fabric of her dress. I'm excited about the wedding, but I can't help but feel anxious about the Cartwrights. They're so different from us." She glanced down, biting her lip. What if they don't approve of Sam? Jack's heart sank at the mention of Emma's soon-to-be in-laws. He understood all too well the weight of their expectations. "Emma, love is what matters most. Sam makes you happy, right?" He stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "That's what you need to focus on." Emma looked up, her blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I know, Dad, but they're so wealthy and sophisticated. And here I am, with you and Mom, who are just trying to make ends meet." Her voice quivered slightly, revealing the vulnerability beneath her confident facade. Jack felt the familiar sting of inadequacy wash over him. He had worked hard as a mechanic and had pursued his dreams of being a singer in the past, but life had taken its toll. "Emma, we may not have their money, but we have something they don't. Love and authenticity. You're marrying Sam because you love him, and that's worth more than any amount of money." Emma nodded, though doubt still lingered in her expression. "I just wish they could see that. Sometimes I feel like they look at us with pity." As the day wore on and the wedding preparations continued, the atmosphere shifted. The bright sun began to set, casting long shadows across the pristine lawn. Later that evening, the Everetts gathered for a family dinner, the air thick with anticipation. Jack set the table, his movements deliberate, but his mind raced with thoughts of the Cartwrights. He had met them only a few times, and each encounter had left him feeling small, as if his very presence was a reminder of the divide between their worlds. When the doorbell rang, Emma's heart raced. She glanced at her father, who wore a mask of composure, but couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. "You ready for this?" she asked, trying to inject some levity into the moment. "Ready as I'll ever be," Jack replied, forcing a smile. He opened the door to reveal the Cartwrights, a picture of poise and sophistication. Mrs. Cartwright, dressed in a designer gown, swept into the house like a queen, while Mr. Cartwright followed closely, his expression one of mild disdain as he surveyed the modest surroundings. "Jack, Emma," Mrs. Cartwright greeted them with a cool smile, her eyes lingering on the worn furniture and the eclectic decor that spoke of years of love rather than wealth. "How lovely to see you again." "Good to see you," Jack replied, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. He gestured for them to sit, and as dinner commenced, the tension in the room was palpable. The conversation flowed, but beneath the surface, Jack sensed the undercurrents of judgment swirling around him like a storm. "So, Jack," Mr. Cartwright began, his tone casual but his words sharp, "how's the mechanic business treating you? Must be tough in these times." Jack felt the heat rise in his cheeks, his throat tightening. "It's going well, actually. I've built a solid clientele," he managed to say, fighting the urge to justify his choices. "Solid clientele? How quaint," Mrs. Cartwright interjected, her voice dripping with condescension. "You know, in our circles, we prefer to invest in ventures that actually yield returns." She glanced at Emma, who sat stiffly at the table, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm proud of what my dad does," Emma asserted, her voice rising slightly. "He's worked hard his whole life." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Cartwright replied dismissively, her eyes narrowing. "But it must be difficult for you to adjust to the kind of life Sam and I are used to." Jack's heart sank further at the underlying implications of her words. He glanced at Emma, who looked devastated. "We may live differently, but what's important is how we treat each other," he said, trying to defuse the tension. The rest of the dinner passed in a haze of strained smiles and awkward silences. Jack felt the weight of their scorn press down on him, but he remained composed, focusing on Emma's well-being rather than his own hurt. As the Cartwrights departed, Jack closed the door with a heavy heart, the echoes of their disdain still ringing in his ears. "Dad, I'm so sorry," Emma whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She reached out to hug him tightly, and Jack wrapped his arms around her, feeling her warmth seep through the layers of worry that had settled over him. "It's not your fault, sweetheart. They don't define who we are," he reassured her, though he felt the sting of their remarks deep within. After the Cartwrights left, Jack retreated to his garage, seeking solace in the familiar surroundings that had always provided him with comfort. The walls, adorned with tools and memories of a simpler time, felt like a sanctuary. He picked up his old guitar, its worn strings a testament to years of love and music. As he strummed softly, the notes filled the space around him, weaving a tapestry of nostalgia. He closed his eyes, allowing the music to carry him away. Memories flooded his mind, his youthful dreams of being a singer, the nights spent playing at local bars, and the joy that music had brought him. It was a reminder of who he used to be, a man untainted by societal judgments. "Why did I let them get to me?" he muttered to himself, his fingers dancing over the strings. "I should be proud of who I am." The melody began to evolve, becoming a reflection of his emotions, his struggles, his love for Emma, and the resilience that had carried him through life thus far. As he played, the world outside faded away. Jack lost himself in the music, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since the wedding preparations began. There, in his garage, he could be free, free from judgment, free from the expectations of others, and free to embrace the man he had always wanted to be. The sun shone brightly on the wedding day, casting a golden hue over the sprawling estate that had been transformed into a fairy tale venue. Chandelier crystals sparkled like stars overhead, and the scent of fresh flowers wafted through the air. Emma stood before a full-length mirror, her heart racing as she adjusted the delicate lace on her wedding gown. It was a vision of elegance, a stark contrast to the modest upbringing Jack had given her. Yet amidst the beauty and grandeur, a shadow loomed over her heart. "Dad," she called softly, her voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Jack stepped into the room, his face warm with a fatherly smile, though his eyes betrayed the weight of his worries. He wore an old suit that had seen better days, too small around the waist, which only magnified his discomfort in this lavish setting. "Emma, you look absolutely stunning," he said, his voice steady despite the fluttering in his chest. "Just like a princess." "Thanks, Dad," she replied, turning to him with a bright smile that momentarily masked her unease. I hope they'll see how much I love Sam. I can't bear the thought of them looking down on you." "Let them think what they want," Jack said, his tone resolute. "You know what matters most, right? You and Sam are about to start a beautiful journey together. That's what we should all focus on." Emma nodded, but Jack could see the worry etched on her face. "Just promise me you'll keep your head high," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You mean everything to me, Dad." "I promise," he replied, though internally he wrestled with the insecurities that clung to him. As they descended the grand staircase together, Jack felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. The ceremony took place in an extravagant garden, the guests seated in plush chairs adorned with silk ribbons. Jack's heart raced as he stepped into the sea of well-dressed relatives and acquaintances, all of whom seemed to exude an air of superiority. The Cartwrights, Emma's in-laws, were a sight to behold, cloaked in designer outfits and surrounded by an aura of wealth that made Jack feel like an imposter. "Look at that suit," he heard one of the Cartwrights whisper to another, their laughter echoing through the air. Jack's cheeks burned with humiliation. He wanted nothing more than to shrink away, to disappear into the background, but he reminded himself of Emma's words. As he scanned the crowd, he caught sight of Emma, radiant and glowing as she walked down the aisle. She was a vision, and all Jack could feel was a rush of pride. His heart swelled as he realized that she had made it to this moment against all odds. Yet the scrutiny of the Cartwrights hung heavily over him, like a dark cloud. "Dad, are you okay?" Emma's voice cut through his thoughts, and he turned to see her standing before him, her eyes searching his. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said, forcing a smile. "Just a little overwhelmed, that's all." "You'll be with me, right?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "Always," he assured her, taking her hand in his, feeling the warmth radiate from her touch. As the ceremony began, Jack tried to focus on the vows being exchanged, but his attention kept drifting to the Cartwrights, who were whispering and laughing amongst themselves. He caught snippets of their conversation, their judgmental glances slicing through him like daggers. "Doesn't he look out of place?" one of them snickered, and Jack felt his stomach twist. "Why did she even invite him?" another chimed in, their laughter ringing hollow in his ears. He clenched his fist, fighting the urge to shout back at them. Instead, he took a deep breath, reminding himself of the love that surrounded him, the love he had for Emma and the love she had for Sam. The vows were exchanged, and Jack's heart swelled with pride as he watched Emma and Sam promise their lives to each other. Yet as they sealed their vows with a kiss, Jack noticed the Cartwrights' eyes lingering on him, a mix of disdain and amusement reflected in their expressions. He felt exposed, as if they had peeled back the layers of his heart and were mocking the very essence of who he was. "Are you ready for the reception?" Emma asked as they moved down the aisle, her excitement bubbling over. "I am," Jack replied, though he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to him. The reception hall was a spectacle. Elegant tables adorned with crystal and gold, a lavish spread of food, and laughter that filled the air. Yet, as they entered the room, Jack felt more like a ghost than a guest. The laughter of the Cartwrights echoed in his ears, a reminder of the divide between their worlds. As Emma mingled with her guests, Jack stood at the edge of the room, nursing a drink and trying to blend into the wallpaper. He watched as Emma glided between tables, her joy infectious, and he wished he could share in her happiness without the weight of judgment hanging over him. "Jack!" a voice called out, pulling him from his thoughts. It was one of Sam's friends, a jovial man with a wide smile. "Come on, let's celebrate. It's a wedding after all." "I'll be there in a moment," Jack replied, forcing a smile. He turned back to the room, feeling the walls closing in on him. He caught sight of the Cartwrights again, their laughter ringing out like a chorus of crows. "What a shame," he heard one say, "that she had to settle for someone like him." Jack's heart sank. He wanted to scream, to shout that he was more than just the suit he wore or the life he lived. He was Emma's father, a man who had poured his heart and soul into raising her, a man who had dreams once. But those dreams felt so distant now, eclipsed by the weight of their judgment. As the music played and the guests began to dance, Jack felt a pang of nostalgia. He remembered the nights spent strumming his guitar, pouring his heart into each note, dreaming of a life filled with music and happiness. But those dreams had been replaced with responsibilities, and now, standing in that opulent room, he felt like a relic of a bygone era. Suddenly the room grew quiet as the officiant announced the first dance. Jack watched as Emma and Sam took to the floor, their movements graceful and filled with love. A smile broke through his worries as he admired his daughter's happiness. But even as he reflected on this joyous moment, the laughter of the Cartwrights returned, sneering at his presence. "Look at him, standing there like a lost puppy," a voice whispered, and Jack's heart raced with frustration. He turned away, fighting back tears of anger and despair. How could they be so cruel? He felt an overwhelming urge to escape, to find solace outside where he could breathe freely. Making his way through the crowd, he stepped out into the cool evening air. The world outside was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos he had just left behind. Jack leaned against the railing, taking deep breaths as he tried to calm the storm inside him. The stars twinkled above and the moonlight bathed the garden in a soft glow. He pulled his phone from his pocket, contemplating calling Emma, but he knew she was busy celebrating. Then, as if summoned by an unseen force, he reached for his guitar, which he had kept hidden in the car. It was an old friend, worn and weathered, but it still held the magic he had poured into it years ago. He strummed a few chords, the familiar sound igniting a flicker of joy within him. As he played, the music began to soothe his troubled heart. Each note was a release, a reminder of who he was beneath the weight of judgment. He closed his eyes, losing himself in the melody, the world around him fading away. In that moment, he was no longer the struggling father. He was a man who loved music, a man with dreams and hopes. But even as he played, the laughter of the Cartwrights lingered in his mind, a haunting reminder of the divide between them. Jack knew he would have to confront this challenge, to find a way to bridge the gap between his past and the life Emma had chosen. With each strum, he felt a resolve building within him. Perhaps music could be the key to breaking through the barriers they had built. Perhaps it could show them the depth of his love for Emma, the sacrifices he had made, and the dreams he still held dear. As he played, he felt the weight of the world slowly lifting. The music wrapped around him like a warm embrace, filling the empty spaces in his heart. And in that moment, Jack knew that no matter what the Cartwrights thought, he would stand tall. He would be there for Emma, not just as her father, but as a man who refused to be defined by the judgments of others. The evening wore on and the grand hall buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, but Jack felt a weight pressing down on him that no amount of celebration could lift. As the guests mingled around the lavish tables adorned with white roses and golden accents, he could hear the soft murmur of conversations, punctuated by bursts of laughter that felt like daggers to his heart. He couldn't shake off the feeling of being an outsider in this opulent world, a world that seemed to look down on him at every turn. When Emma's name was announced for the toast, Jack's stomach knotted. He knew he was next. As he rose from his seat, the polite applause from the guests felt more like a formality than genuine warmth. He could see the Cartwrights' eyes narrow as they awaited his words, their expressions a mix of scrutiny and disdain. He cleared his throat, gripping the microphone tightly. Hello everyone, he began, his voice slightly wavering. For those who don't know me, I'm Jack, Emma's father. The crowd's reaction was muted, a few polite smiles, but mostly indifference. He forced himself to continue. I just wanted to say how happy I am for my daughter. And Sam, they make a lovely couple, and I know they'll have a wonderful life together. But as he spoke, he couldn't help but notice the Cartwrights whispering amongst themselves. Their lips curled into sneers, and he caught snippets of their words. He should have dressed better, one of them said. Jack's heart sank further. He gritted his teeth, trying to suppress the embarrassment that threatened to bubble over. Emma, you've always been a bright light in our lives, he said, the sincerity in his voice rising above the uncomfortable atmosphere. And Sam, you're a good man. Just remember to always support each other. As he concluded his toast, the polite clapping felt hollow against the backdrop of their disdain. He returned to his seat, trying to mask the flush creeping up his neck. Emma glanced at him, concern etched on her beautiful face. You did great, Dad, she whispered, but he could see the worry in her eyes. He forced a smile, but inside, he felt like he was drowning in a sea of judgment. The reception continued, and Jack's gaze drifted to Emma and Sam, who were now dancing under the soft glow of the chandeliers. Emma twirled, her gown shimmering like a cascade of stars. Sam held her close, their laughter ringing out like music that Jack could almost hear above the chatter. A wave of nostalgia washed over him, pulling him back to his own youth, to the love he shared with Emma's mother, to the dreams they once had. Do you remember our first dance? Jack whispered to himself, a bittersweet smile creeping onto his face. He could still picture the small community center, the flickering lights, and the way his heart raced as he held her in his arms. They had danced like no one was watching, lost in a world only they inhabited, oblivious to the judgments of others. But now, in this grand hall filled with wealth and privilege, the past felt like a distant memory, consumed by the harsh reality of the present. He longed to connect with that version of himself, the one who believed that dreams could come true, that love could conquer all. Instead, he felt the weight of his modest upbringing pressing down on him, suffocating the very dreams he once held dear. As the night wore on, Jack excused himself from the table, overwhelmed by the need for fresh air. He slipped out into the cool evening, grateful for the reprieve from the glaring lights and prying eyes. The garden was quiet, beautifully manicured, and illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns hanging from the trees. He wandered to a secluded corner where the noise of the reception faded into the background. Jack pulled his old guitar from its case, the familiar weight comforting in his hands. He sat down on a stone bench, the coolness of the surface grounding him in the moment. He strummed a few chords, letting the warm notes fill the space around him. Music had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could express his deepest feelings without fear of judgment. As the melody flowed from his fingers, he closed his eyes, losing himself in the rhythm. He thought of Emma, of her bright smile and the way she had always believed in him. He thought of the sacrifices he made, the late nights spent working to provide for her, and the dreams he set aside for her happiness. "Maybe I can still find my voice," he murmured softly, the music wrapping around him like a comforting embrace. Each note resonated with the love he felt for his daughter, the pride he held in her accomplishments, and the hope he had for her future. Just then, he heard footsteps approaching. Turning, he saw Emma and Sam stepping outside, their laughter now muffled by the garden stillness. They stopped short, eyes wide as they took in the scene before them. Jack, lost in his music, the guitar resting comfortably in his lap. "Dad?" Emma called softly, stepping closer. Sam followed, a look of surprise on his face. "We didn't know you played." Jack hesitated, feeling exposed under their gaze. "It's just a hobby," he replied, trying to downplay the moment. "I used to play a lot when you were younger." Emma exchanged a look with Sam, then stepped closer. "You should play more. You have a beautiful voice," she encouraged, her eyes sparkling with admiration. "Can we hear you sing?" The request hung in the air, and for a moment, Jack felt a surge of fear. What if they didn't like it? What if the Cartwrights heard and laughed? But as he looked into Emma's encouraging eyes, something shifted within him. He remembered why he loved music: to connect, to share, to express love and joy. Taking a deep breath, he nodded. "Okay," he said, his voice steadying. "Just a little something." He began strumming again, the chords echoing through the night air, feeling the music seep into his very soul. As he started to sing a soft tune about love, resilience, and the passage of time, he felt the weight of his worries slowly lifting. Emma and Sam stood entranced, watching him with wide, appreciative smiles. In that moment, he allowed himself to be vulnerable, to share a piece of himself that had long been hidden away. The night was filled with the sound of Jack's voice, weaving stories of love and dreams, a stark contrast to the opulence that surrounded them. In that quiet garden, he was no longer just Emma's father or the man judged by the Cartwrights. He was a musician, a storyteller, and for the first time that evening, he felt a glimmer of acceptance, of himself, of his past, and of the possibility of a brighter future. The evening air was crisp as Jack strummed his guitar softly in the secluded corner of the garden. A gentle breeze ruffled the leaves, carrying the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses from the reception inside. He closed his eyes, immersing himself in the music that had always been his refuge. The song he played was a heartfelt tune, a melody that spoke of love and resilience, reflecting the very emotions that filled his heart at that moment. Unbeknownst to him, Emma and Sam had decided to take a break from the festivities. Hand in hand, they strolled towards the garden, their laughter mingling with the night air. As they rounded the corner, Emma stopped in her tracks, her eyes widening in surprise. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Sam turned to her, eyebrows raised in curiosity. "Is that your father?" he asked, stepping closer to Emma. The sight of Jack, lost in his world of music, filled her with a mixture of pride and concern. Emma nodded, her heart swelling as she listened to Jack's voice, rough yet filled with emotion. The song he sang spoke of dreams and battles fought, of love that could withstand the tests of time. It was a song that echoed the struggles of their family, a song that resonated deep within her. "Dad's really good," Sam remarked, his admiration evident. "You should ask him to sing at the reception." "Not now." Emma hesitated, biting her lip as she weighed the prospect. "I don't know. He's always been shy about performing in front of others, especially the Cartwrights." "But this is your wedding, Emma," Sam insisted gently. "He should share this moment with you. Besides, it's beautiful. Why hide it?" Emma glanced back at her father, who was now lost in the lyrics, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the garden lights. She could see the passion in his expression, the way his fingers danced over the strings. "You're right," she finally said, determination setting in her voice. "He needs to know how much we love him and how much his music means to us." With a newfound resolve, Emma took a deep breath and stepped forward. She approached her father, her heart racing. "Dad?" she called, her voice warm but firm. Jack halted mid-strum, eyes fluttering open as he turned to see Emma standing there, a mix of surprise and joy on her face. "Emma! Sam!" he exclaimed, a wide smile breaking across his features. "What are you two doing out here?" Emma exchanged a glance with Sam, who nodded encouragingly. "We were enjoying the music," she said, her voice softening. "It's beautiful, Dad. You have to share it with everyone inside?" Jack's eyes widened, and he shook his head, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips. "Oh no, sweetheart. I couldn't possibly. Not in front of all those people. They won't understand." Emma stepped closer, her expression earnest. "But they will. You're part of this family, and your music is a part of who you are. You deserve to be seen, Dad." Sam chimed in, his voice steady and supportive. "Emma's right. You have a gift. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Jack looked between them, uncertainty flickering in his gaze. The weight of the Cartwrights' judgment loomed over him like a dark cloud. "You don't know what they'll say, what they'll think," he murmured, his fingers nervously fidgeting with the guitar strings. "Who cares what they think?" Emma replied, her voice rising with passion. "This is your moment, Dad. You can show them who you really are. You've always been there for me. Now let us be there for you." The sincerity in Emma's eyes tugged at Jack's heart. He felt a swell of emotion, the warmth of her love wrapping around him like a comforting blanket. But the fear of judgment still clung to him, stifling his courage. "Dad, please," Emma urged, her voice softening. "You've always taught me to be brave and to follow my dreams. This is your chance to do the same." Jack hesitated, wrestling with the conflicting feelings. He could still hear the echoes of laughter and music from the reception, a world where he felt like an outsider. But as he looked at Emma and Sam, their faces brimming with encouragement, he felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. "Okay," he finally said, taking a deep breath. "I'll do it." Emma's face lit up with joy. "Really? You will?" "Yeah," Jack replied, his voice steadier now. "But just one song. I can't promise I'll be good enough." "You'll be amazing," Sam reassured him, clapping a hand on Jack's shoulder. "Let's go." As they walked back towards the reception, Jack felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through him. The doubts that had plagued him began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose. He stepped into the brightly lit hall, where the chatter and laughter of guests filled the air. All eyes turned to him as he approached the microphone, the atmosphere shifting from casual merriment to curious anticipation. Jack's heart raced as he stood before the crowd, the weight of their gaze heavy on his shoulders. He glanced toward Emma, who stood near the front, her eyes sparkling with pride and encouragement. Sam stood beside her, giving him an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, Jack grasped the microphone, his fingers trembling slightly. He looked out at the crowd, the faces of the Cartwrights aligned among the guests, their expressions a blend of skepticism and intrigue. He swallowed hard, feeling the familiar thrill of performing wash over him, mingled with the fear of rejection. Hi everyone," he began, his voice shaking slightly. I'm Jack, Emma's father, and I'd like to play a song for you all." A few scattered claps broke the silence, but Jack's gaze lingered on Emma, who beamed back at him with unwavering support. He strummed the first chord, letting the music flow through him. The melody filled the room, and for a moment he was no longer the struggling mechanic. He was a musician reclaiming a piece of himself. As he began to sing, his voice resonated with authenticity, the lyrics pouring from his heart. The crowd fell into a hushed silence, captivated by the raw emotion that flowed through him. Jack lost himself in the music, the tension in his shoulders easing as he connected with the audience, transforming their skepticism into something softer, something beautiful. With each note, he felt the burdens of judgment begin to lift. The music was a bridge, linking him to his daughter, to Sam, and to the guests who were slowly warming to his presence. But just as he reached the emotional crescendo of the song, he caught a glimpse of the Cartwrights' faces, eyes narrowed, lips pressed into thin lines. Despite the flicker of doubt that threatened to creep in, he pressed on, pouring every ounce of his heart into the performance. As he sang about love, resilience, and the journey of life, he felt the walls he had built around himself start to crumble. In that moment, Jack was no longer just a man of modest means. He was a father, a musician, and a storyteller. And as the last notes rang out, he opened his eyes to see the crowd's reaction, a mix of surprise, admiration, and something he had longed for, acceptance. But before he could bask in the glow of that triumph, a sudden shift in the atmosphere drew his attention. The door swung open, the sound of heels clicking against the floor echoed through the hall, and the crowd parted to make way for a figure that would change everything. As Jack's voice filled the room, a palpable shift occurred among the guests. The initial hushed whispers and stifled laughter from the Cartwrights faded into an attentive silence, their expressions transforming from disdain to curiosity. Jack, standing at the microphone, felt the weight of years of self-doubt and societal judgment begin to lift, if only for a moment. The familiar strum of his guitar resonated with a warmth that wrapped around him like a comforting embrace, inviting him to share his heart with everyone present. "Love is a journey, a winding road," he sang, his voice steady and filled with emotion. The lyrics flowed effortlessly, each note dripping with sincerity. Jack's fingers danced over the guitar strings, creating melodies that wove through the air, capturing the attention of even the most skeptical guests. He glanced over at Emma, who stood at the edge of the dance floor, her eyes sparkling with pride. She swayed gently to the rhythm, her smile wide and encouraging. In that moment, he felt a surge of gratitude for her unwavering support. The Cartwrights, who had once seemed so imposing, now appeared to be caught off guard by the authenticity of his performance. Margaret Cartwright, Emma's mother-in-law, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her lips pressed tightly together as if she were fighting an internal battle. Jack caught her eye for a fleeting moment, and for the first time, he saw a glimmer of respect reflected back at him. The tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by an unexpected camaraderie among the guests, who were beginning to appreciate the power of his music. As Jack continued to sing about the trials of love and the strength it requires to overcome obstacles, he could see the guests start to nod along, some even tapping their feet to the rhythm. A few individuals exchanged glances, and Jack noticed the warmth spreading among them, a collective acknowledgement of the universal truths he was expressing through his song. He felt emboldened. The music was his bridge, connecting him to this crowd that had once seemed so foreign. "Hold on to your dreams," he sang, his voice rising with passion. "Through the storms and the shadows, let love be your guide." The words resonated deeply, not only with Emma, but with Sam, who stood proudly beside her. Jack could see the love between them, radiating as they shared a quiet moment, their fingers intertwined. It reminded him of his own youthful romance, the dreams he had once held close to his heart, and the sacrifices he made to provide for his family. With each note, the atmosphere transformed further. The Cartwrights, caught in the spell of his performance, began to lean toward one another, whispering softly, their previous smugness melting away. Jack noticed the subtle nods of approval from some of the guests, many of whom were captivated by the heartfelt lyrics. The room was no longer divided by class. Instead, it was united by the shared experience of love and resilience that Jack conveyed through his music. As the song reached its crescendo, Jack poured every ounce of emotion he possessed into the final notes. "So let your hearts soar high, and let your spirits be free," he finished, his voice echoing in the stillness that enveloped the venue. The last chord hung in the air, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, as if the universe had been holding its breath, the room erupted into applause. Jack, panting slightly from the intensity of his performance, stood frozen at the microphone, disbelief washing over him. The sound of clapping hands was not just a polite acknowledgement of his song, it was an affirmation, a celebration of his journey and the courage it took to share himself so openly. Emma rushed forward, her face radiant with pride and joy. "Dad, that was incredible," she exclaimed, her voice breaking slightly with emotion. She embraced him tightly, and he felt the warmth of her love seep into his bones. "You were amazing. I knew you could do it." The sincerity in her words filled Jack's heart with a sense of belonging he had long yearned for. Just as he began to revel in the moment, a figure appeared at the back of the venue, casting a long shadow across the cheering crowd. Jack's heart skipped a beat as recognition flooded through him. The atmosphere shifted again, but this time it was not one of admiration or camaraderie. It was thick with confusion and a hint of dread. "Sarah?" he whispered under his breath, his voice barely audible above the applause. His estranged sister stood there, her vibrant presence a stark contrast to the subdued elegance of the wedding. Dressed in a striking red dress, she looked every bit the star he remembered, with an air of confidence that seemed to draw all eyes. But for Jack, the sight of her was a jarring reminder of the past he had tried to leave behind. Emma noticed his abrupt change in demeanor and followed his gaze. "Dad, what's wrong?" she asked, her brow furrowing with concern. Jack remained rooted to the spot, the microphone slipping from his grasp as he struggled to process the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to engulf him. "Jack, you look like you've seen a ghost?" Emma continued, her voice laced with worry. "Are you okay?" He nodded slowly, though his heart raced. It's Sarah," he managed to say, his eyes still locked on his sister. Memories flooded his mind, years of distance, heartbreak, and unresolved issues that had lingered like a shadow over his life. He hadn't expected to see her here, not today, not at Emma's wedding. At the back of the room, Sarah's gaze was fixed on Jack, her expression unreadable. The applause faded away, replaced by a heavy silence that blanketed the venue. The guests, sensing the shift, began to murmur amongst themselves, their curiosity piqued by the unexpected reunion. "Jack!" Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the tension. "I came to see you." The determination in her tone sent a ripple of unease through Jack. He had spent years trying to make peace with her absence, and now here she was, stirring up feelings he thought he had buried. He took a deep breath, the weight of his guitar still in his hands. "What are you doing here, Sarah?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling within him. "I heard you were performing," she replied, stepping forward, her eyes glistening with an intensity he hadn't seen in years. "I needed to see you. I've missed you." The room was thick with anticipation, the guests eager to witness the unfolding drama. Jack's heart raced, caught between the joy of the moment and the unresolved tension that had festered for far too long. He could feel Emma's hand on his arm, grounding him, but the weight of Sarah's presence was undeniable. "Can we talk?" Sarah asked, her voice softer now as she stood just a few feet away from him, her gaze locked onto his. Jack felt the world around him fade as he stood at the crossroads of reconciliation and revelation, unsure of how to navigate the emotions that had been reignited by her sudden appearance. All he could think about was how this moment would shape not only his relationship with Sarah, but also the day that had been meant to celebrate Emma and Sam's love. And as the murmurs grew louder, Jack realized that the music he had just shared was only the beginning of a much deeper and more complex symphony that awaited him, one that would require him to confront his past and embrace the uncertain future that lay ahead. The atmosphere in the grand reception hall was electric, the air thick with anticipation as Jack stood at the microphone, his heart racing. He had just begun to feel the warm embrace of the music when a figure emerged from the shadows at the back of the room. Jack's eyes widened in disbelief as he recognized the familiar silhouette, Sarah, his estranged sister. It had been years since he had seen her, the years marked by silence and unspoken words, and now she stood there, her presence sending ripples of confusion through the crowd. As Sarah pushed her way through the throng of guests, whispers danced around the room. "Is that—" "No, it can't be," murmured one guest, while another added, "I thought she left for good." Jack's heart sank, conflicting emotions surging within him. He had just begun to reclaim his voice, to assert his place in this world that had often made him feel like an outsider. And now, here was Sarah, her return both a blessing and a curse. "Jack!" Sarah called out, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the lingering notes of his song. "Stop! We need to talk!" The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward the siblings. Jack felt the heat rise to his cheeks, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had spent years building walls around his heart, and now they felt like they were crumbling. "Sarah," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper, the emotion churning within him. "What are you doing here?" "Isn't it obvious?" she shot back, her tone laced with bitterness. "I came to see you, to see how you're doing, or rather, how you're not doing. Still hiding behind that guitar, I see." The tension in the air thickened, a palpable discomfort settling over the guests. Jack could feel their eyes boring into him, and he instinctively took a step back, his grip tightening on the microphone. "This isn't the time or place for this," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, to assert some semblance of control over the situation. "Right? Because your daughter's wedding isn't the time to talk about our broken family?" Sarah insisted, her cheeks flushed with emotion. "You've been living in your little bubble, pretending everything is fine while you ignore the truths that matter." Jack's heart raced, a mix of anger and hurt surging within him. "You left us, Sarah. You chose fame over family. You don't get to come back and act like you have the moral high ground," he retorted, his voice rising. Emma, standing a few feet away, felt the tension crackling like a live wire. She could see the pain etched on her father's face, the strain of years lost juxtaposed against the joy of the day. She stepped forward, her voice calm yet firm. "Please, both of you, this isn't the time for old grievances. Let's just breathe." "Breathe?" Sarah scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "How can we breathe when there's so much air between us that's filled with resentment and regret? Jack, this isn't just about you. It's about us, about what we lost." "Lost?" Jack echoed, feeling the sting of her words. "You made your choice, Sarah. You left to chase your dreams, and in doing so, you left our family behind." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, their curiosity piqued but unsure how to react to the unfolding family drama. Emma's heart ached for both of them. She understood her father's pain, the weight of years spent apart, but she also recognized Sarah's anger as a reflection of her own struggles for acceptance. "Dad, please," Emma urged, her voice softening. "Can we just take a moment to understand each other instead of throwing accusations? We're family, and we all have wounds." "Wounds?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in her voice. "You think I'm the only one with wounds? Jack, you've wrapped yourself in this image of a struggling artist, but you've also built walls around your heart. You shut me out when I needed you most." Jack's expression softened, the harsh lines of anger fading. "I didn't know how to reach you, Sarah. I was trying to hold everything together after you left. It felt like I was losing everything," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. Emma stepped closer to her father, her heart swelling with empathy. "Maybe this is a chance for both of you to let go of the past," she suggested, her gaze shifting between them. "You both deserve to heal, to find a way back to each other." Sarah's expression softened slightly, the fire in her eyes dimming. "I didn't come here to fight, Jack. I came because I've missed you. Us. But it's hard to ignore the hurt, the years apart." Jack sighed, the weight of the years pressing heavily on his shoulders. "I've missed you too, Sarah. I never stopped thinking about you, even when it hurt too much to say your name." The crowd remained hushed, the tension shifting into a more somber tone. Emma felt a flicker of hope as she watched the two of them, the cracks in their armor beginning to show. "Can we at least start by being honest with each other?" she asked gently. "No more hiding." "Honesty?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's a tall order after everything that's happened." Jack nodded, feeling the vulnerability in the air. "But it's a start. I can't promise it'll be easy, but I'm willing to try." He looked at Sarah, the years of silence hanging heavily between them. "Can you?" Sarah hesitated, looking around the room at the faces of their family and friends. Finally, she nodded, albeit reluctantly. "I'll try." Emma felt a sense of relief wash over her. "Then let's take this one step at a time. We're all here together, and we can't change the past, but we can start fresh. Just as Jack opened his mouth to respond, the sound of applause broke the tension. It was the guests, moved by the raw emotion unfolding before them. They clapped not just for the performance that had been interrupted, but for the courageous acknowledgement of family strife, for the willingness to confront painful truths. Jack's heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and resilience. Perhaps this moment could be a turning point. As the applause faded, Jack took a deep breath, feeling a new sense of purpose. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. "Thank you all for your patience. Family is complicated, but it's what we make of it that matters." Emma smiled, her heart full as she watched her father begin to mend the frayed bonds of their family. The night was still young, and perhaps they could find a way to turn this emotional turmoil into a celebration of healing and hope. Jack glanced at Sarah, seeing the flicker of understanding in her eyes, and felt a renewed sense of determination as he prepared to reclaim his voice, not just as a performer, but as a father and brother, ready to embrace the complexities of love and family.